So our next speaker will be Amy Chadwick with Great West Engineering.
Hi, thank you for having me here and for your attention. And I'll stand close to the mic and be stand still. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the beaver mimicry techniques, this class of restoration we've been doing in Montana specifically. And I think, well, a lot of what the previous talks have gone over are a good foundation for this. There's a lot of stuff I don't have to explain now because I went after Joe, so it's great. Anyway, so I'll get right into it with the reason why we're doing some of this in Montana. A lot of what's been fueling the beaver mimicry projects is concern about water currently and in future, with concern for the climate change considerations, future drought, and also increasingly for habitat, for sage grouse and fish and pretty much everything. So you can see signs of habitat loss all over the landscape. So we're working in some areas where there are wet meadows that 20 years ago were, this upper slide, 20 years ago these were standing beaver ponds, and now the pines are growing in on the low floodplain, and it's converting to upland pine system, and as the stream is cutting down. And in eastern Montana, this is in Butte area, headwaters above Butte. And then the lower one is eastern Montana, and that is, here's what's left of your riparian vegetation, basically. You can see old side channels, and there's just been a lot of streams that have undergone degradation over time. And a lot of this has basically started with removal of beaver from the system. And so what the goal is with a lot of these projects is really focused on water, getting that sub-irrigation restored, reconnecting the floodplain, which will help browse and also helps the habitat. Just to go a little bit more into that consideration with natural water storage in the floodplain and sub-irrigation. If you just take a small meadow, I just threw this one up here. Here's an example, very common, what I've seen in widespread, this kind of condition through southwest Montana. And say this is 100 feet by 200 feet and the water table's dropped, let's just say 2 feet for easy math, after the beavers were removed. And eventually this is converting to upland and dries out quite significantly because that little red line is all that's being sub-irrigated currently through the season. And so just looking at a simple little place like this, you're looking at a loss of 12,000 cubic feet of storage if you consider about a 30% soil porosity. So that's not including evapotranspiration. I didn't run a model on it or anything, but just as a simple calculation, if you think of there are hundreds of miles of this in Montana. So there's a lot of potential for more natural water storage. So I'll go through some of the techniques that we're using in Montana, and they span a gamut from very, very simple to a little bit more complex and expensive with machinery. But the common thread is that they all use native materials procured on site generally or close by, and they mimic the action of beaver with the goal of restoring the processes that beavers put on the landscape. So starting at the simpler end, this was done by Jeff Burrell of Wildlife Conservation Society, and this is in Norwegian Creek in southwest Montana. And it's just simply getting a bunch of volunteers, doing the permitting first. Anyway, getting the volunteers, collecting a whole bunch of willow brush and cutting little stakes, putting them in. And for something as simple like this, you're looking at, it's not going to hold back a lot of energy. So the key here is to do a series of low, very leaky dams. Each one will slow the water a little bit, and that's enough to get the sediment to fall out. So this started as a 10-foot incised channel, and after they were done, he had to go back the same year once to build up the dams again because it had filled in by 2 feet. So he was able to build this channel at least 2 feet a year for a few years to reconnect the floodplain and the stream. So a very simple project. That's one example. A lot of what I've been doing, this is in the upper Clark Fork Basin, several sites between Deer Lodge and Butte, or the headwaters above Butte. So I work in wet meadows where the where it's still, basically the wetlands are intact, and in some drier areas where the channel has become incised, and it's just in basic, more dry rangeland setting. And this we have been combining with conifer encroachment projects. So we're cutting conifers out of aspen groves for aspen release and off the low floodplain, and then we're creating the posts and the brush to create your more classic beaver dam analog design, and incorporating wetland sod in with this. So these are designed to withstand a little more pressure, and some of them are a little more leaky and don't incorporate as much sod. But if you want to have a dam that, go a little more intensive, that's when you want to maybe back up the water a little more, create a little bit of pooling, and it's going to withstand a little bit more of the pressure. And what we found is that how much the sod and mud additions to the design are important depends on your natural sediment load. So the higher the sediment load, the more you can get away with a leaky dam and have pretty much the same effect, because it's going to bury your beaver dam analog. So anyway, we've had very good response with this, and these again are all installed by hand. A lot of volunteer work. It's great for community workshops. We've had a few, worked with some ranchers, have their own family doing that. So that's kind of the middle range, and then in the Centennial Valley, there have been some projects that have actually used excavators. Same principle though, they're using conifer and sedge sod and willow stakes, or willow brush. And so this is more of an approach where they're keying the structure into the bed and bank and alternating brush and sod, and anyway, so kind of creating a layered system, and ramped up to the dam and down from the dam more aggressively than we would by hand. So these tend to be a little bit taller dams, but they fill up, do kind of all of the work in 1 year. Whereas when you have the projects that are done all by hand, often it's good to do them over a couple years, because you're building lower dams that aren't going to withstand as much pressure. And another key thing with creating these dams, especially the smaller you go, the more you want to install them in series, and you may have heard this in previous talks. But that is another key to the dams. One dam will support the other by pulling off some of the pressure from the top one. I'll get into some of the preliminary monitoring. There hasn't been a lot of monitoring going on for long in Montana. We do have some results. This one is from the Centennial also. And I should have mentioned that last project was done by Scott Gilliland and Nature Conservancy. So Andy Bopst with Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology and Montana Tech has been monitoring the effects of that last project where they're using the excavator and doing the larger dams. And Andy's been doing a lot of monitoring and modeling, and I really don't have time to get into all of what he's done. But just a couple simple results. This upper bit, he put a green line around this. This is where they were able to raise the groundwater level by over a foot. So it's just a demonstration of how they were able to re-wet this whole meadow with a few of these structures. And the lower one is showing the change in, this is pre-restoration and the blue is post-restoration. And this is all piezometer well groundwater data. But what they're showing is that not only did they re-wet a meadow with this, they are maintaining more of a consistency of sub-irrigation by maintaining a higher groundwater level. Andy said there's not a lot of, he didn't see a significant change in the stream flows with the surface flows. And that is, I'll talk about that. We found much the same trends. We've done some preliminary monitoring on the projects that we've put up in the upper Clark Fork. And Evan Norman with Clark Fork Watershed Education Program has been doing a lot of the monitoring and is doing the analysis. So hopefully he'll be able to present some quantitative results in the next year or two. So we also put in some piezometers. And what I can show mostly now is just qualitative trends. What we did find, basically the same effect in our reaches where we did the treatments and installed the classic design beaver dam analogs. We were able to raise the groundwater in the treated reaches, and it stayed up throughout the season. In the control reaches, we had 2 control reaches upstream, and in both of those, most of the piezometers went dry in August. So it's showing that these are maintaining that sub-irrigation, maintaining that water storage throughout the dry season. With surface flow, we haven't seen any real trends yet in the data, but I have gotten some great qualitative results in that one of the ranchers on whose land we were installing these told us that he had never seen water running under that culvert before at that time of year in August. And that was after last August when we had that flash drought that put us as one of the driest spots in the nation. So that was great to hear. So the numbers aren't showing it yet, but we're seeing results. Floodplain connectivity, meaning how much are we able to raise the channel and reconnect the floodplain. That has had varied results depending on the sediment load and the design. So I talked about it before, how basically if nature or cows or whatever aren't putting the sediment in for you, then you have to add more to the dam if you're going to try to raise that up. Or you can do the series of very leaky dams. Or pretty much if you're in a high enough sediment load area, pretty much anything will work that slows down the water. The fish response has been uniformly great. We have had monitoring done by Jason Lindstrom of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks up in on our projects, and he has found 2 to 3 times the number of fish post-restoration versus pre-restoration. But we've gone back and seen many more, and I've talked with landowners who came up and said, "Did you see all the fish?" You know, so we've seen many more times that at later in the year. So, and it's always pretty quick and very good response from the fish. So it's all very encouraging. But there are some lessons learned. I just wanted to share with you what we've noticed are traits of what's really working. So the most successful dams, I pretty much talked about this a lot. The wetland sod has made a lot of difference. The early designs didn't really incorporate that, and I've noticed that in other states as well, they've gone toward a lot more sod. And that has been a really good addition. We have found that it's very critical to do whatever you can to prevent underscour. So really, when we install the dams, making sure that we're scraping the channel substrate up onto the dam, just as a beaver does. They create a pool and scrape some of it up onto the dam. And then also having that curtain of brush on the downstream side of the dam, just like a beaver does, preventing the scour from happening above and below the dam. And the other key element that I talked about earlier, which is so true, is build them in series. So you want to have your main dams and the support dams, and I'm sure Joe and Nick have both talked about that, but that is really the key to longevity. And also just, as Joe talked about, you know, some failure is expected and completely fine, because some of the partial dams are really building the habitat with the scour and deposition and just the diversity in aquatic habitat. And as with any restoration, of course, you want to consider the site limitations and your objectives when you're deciding what you want to do as far as which techniques you want to use and your approach to it. For instance, when we have areas where there are good spawning gravels and we have native salmonids, we're going to leave some of the area untreated to make sure that they have good runs of spawning gravel in between where we might be building more of the overwintering and rearing and feeding habitats. So just thinking of those as you are considering what to do. A couple other considerations. One is permitting, And especially with the wetland permitting, this is not completely solidified everywhere, and there's been some inconsistency in what different people have experienced, even within the same state and among different states. So this is something that I definitely don't have time to talk about right now, but it is definitely part of the conversation with this restoration, because there's going to be some developments with that, I think, things getting more standardized as far as what is required for permitting. And lastly, I pretty much touched on this, but when you're at a site, you want to respect what is going on, what are the natural processes at the site, and what fits in with the system. Don't put large rock in a small grain, fine sediment system. I put this up here as just an example. When you're in an area, this is a site where beavers have been building these dams completely out of mud. They may incorporate some wetland sod, but I think it just grows from the seed bank. But they're building really broad-based dams, and this is what's been working. They've been happy as clams here, I guess. I didn't ask them, but for over 2 years, not a shrub or a tree in sight. So anyway, they're doing just fine, and if that's working there, it's just kind of like the little low Sagebrush Dam. I absolutely agree with what Joe said there. If that's what works, great, try it. And that's not to say you wouldn't necessarily want to try to create a little more scour and deposition in areas and grazing management, to get some shrubs back into this site, maybe sprig in some willows. There are things you could do, but just as far as, just think about what's natural to that site. So really the bottom line, with every good nature show, there's little preachy bits at the end, so here we go. The main thing is to look at where is that balance. Where can we have win-win-win situations where we're improving water supply, we're improving the habitat, and we're also improving the operation by restoring sub-irrigation of the low floodplain and improving browse over a greater area on the low floodplain, even if we're going to be inundating a little bit closer to the stream. There's always a balance where it's going to be the best solution for all of those considerations. And that's one of the beauties of these kind of techniques, is it's very flexible and it's inexpensive. So you can do trial and error, and you also can do a little bit per year and see how the system responds and how you're getting your resources are responding. And I'll leave you with this. This is one of the best things I think about this work, is that it's so good for involving public workshops, multiple generations, and this is one great way that people can understand that they have, that's what I hope people understand, is that they have maybe more power than they realize to have control of the water on their land by restoring natural water storage. At least in Montana, when done for restoration and following certain guidelines, these do not require a water right. So if you can encourage the beavers to come back and be able to tolerate them, or if you don't, but you're able to mimic some of those processes by doing this technique and restoring the floodplain connectivity, that's power that you have to really manage water on your own land, and of course then that affects browse and the habitat and wildlife response. And particularly it's great to be able to pass that on to future generations, and beaver mimicry is one great way to do that, because it's really fun to build these in the stream. So something that's fantastic for multiple generations to participate in. So thank you. I take any questions if I have time. All right, still digesting. Okay. Thank you.